There are some figures in mythology whose stories are remembered for power, others for vengeance, others still for sacrifice. But some stories endure because they carry all three at once. Tonight's story belongs to a woman whose devotion was said to be so pure that she could shape sand into a vessel strong enough to hold water. A woman whose spiritual connection allowed her to command nature itself. Every morning before sunrise, she walked to the riverbank and formed a pot from wet sand with nothing but discipline and faith. She lifted snakes like ropes. She carried sacred water for rituals. And through her devotion, she became revered as divine. Her name was Renuka, a goddess worshipped across southern India and Maharashtra. A mother, a wife, a symbol of purity and devotion. But her story is also one of anger, punishment, violence, and resurrection. Because one moment of distraction beside a river changed everything. A single thought, a fleeting moment, and suddenly, devotion became suspicion. Love became rage, and a husband demanded that his own sons kill their mother. 4 sons refused, 1 obeyed, and with a single swing of an axe, Renuka's story became one of the most haunting and emotionally complex legends in Hindu mythology. Tonight, witches and wanderers, we step into the sacred rivers, forests, and temples of India, and we meet the goddess called Renuka. Hello, and welcome back, witches and wanderers, to the Morbid Witch Podcast, where we explore myths, folklore, legends, and the darker stories hidden within cultures across the world. I'm your host, Kari Murders. Each episode, we journey into tales of gods, spirits, ancient beliefs, and the powerful stories humanity has carried through generations. Some of these stories are terrifying, some are tragic, and some reveal complicated truths about devotion, morality, family, and power. Tonight's episode brings us into Hindu mythology and the story of Renuka, a goddess whose worship continues across the southern Indian states of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, and in the western state of Maharashtra. Her mythology is deeply layered, filled with miracles, penance, violence, resurrection, and spiritual transformation. And at the center of it all is a woman whose devotion became both her strength and her suffering. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're returning, it's always good to have you back. To all my witches and wanderers, thank you for being here and continuing to support the show. Every listen, every comment, every rating, and every shared episode helps keep this strange little corner of storytelling alive. I truly appreciate every single one of you spending your time here with me. Before we begin, just a quick reminder. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to rate the show. Those small actions truly help the podcast continue to grow. You can listen to the Morbid Witch Podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Pandora. Now, let's begin at the ritual fire where Renuka's story first started. According to legend, Renuka's story begins not with ordinary birth, but with ritual. Her father, King Renu performed a sacred ceremony intended to maintain peace and health throughout his kingdom. Rituals in Hindu traditions often carry immense spiritual significance, serving as bridges between the human and divine worlds. This particular ritual was powerful enough to produce a miraculous blessing. From the sacred fire itself, Renuka emerged. Her birth immediately marked her as extraordinary. She was described as bright, energetic, and deeply beloved by her parents. As she grew older, Renuka became known not only for her beauty, but also for her devotion and spiritual discipline. In many Hindu stories, divine or semi-divine figures reveal their nature early through signs of purity or supernatural ability. Renuka's life followed this pattern from the very beginning. When Renuka was still very young, the sage Agastya, who served as King Renu's guru, advised that she should eventually marry Jamadagni. This was not a casual suggestion. Agastya was a highly revered sage associated with wisdom, balance, and spiritual authority. His guidance carried enormous weight, and Jamadagni himself was no ordinary man. Jamadagni was the son of the sage Rushika and Satyavati. Through intense penance and spiritual discipline, he had earned divine blessings from the gods. He was deeply devoted to ritual practice and ascetic living. In many ways, Renuka and Jamadagni represented a union built upon spirituality and sacred duty rather than romance. Their relationship would become central not only to Renuka's mythology, but also to the story of one of Hinduism's most famous warrior figures, Parashurama. After their marriage, Renuka devoted herself fully to assisting Jamadagni in his rituals and spiritual practices. She became his partner in maintaining sacred order. Her life revolved around discipline, devotion, and service. And according to legend, that devotion granted her extraordinary powers. Every morning before sunrise, Renuka walked to the Malaprabha river, and there she performed miracles. Each morning, Renuka bathed in the waters of the Malaprabha river with absolute concentration and purity of mind. Her devotion to her husband and her spiritual discipline were said to be so powerful that they altered the natural world around her. Using only wet sand from the riverbank, she shaped a vessel strong enough to hold water. The pot never broke. It remained perfectly intact through the force of her spiritual energy alone. The miracles did not end there. Nearby snakes would become soft and obedient in her hands. Renuka used them as ropes, balancing the sand pot upon her head as she carried water back to Jamadagni's hermitage. Every detail of this ritual reflected sacred order. The river, the sand, the serpent, and the water all became part of her devotion. Through discipline and focus, nature itself responded to her will. In Hindu mythology, concentration and purity often create spiritual power known as tapas. This power is not simply magical. It is the result of discipline, restraint, and sacred intention. Renuka's abilities reflected the immense strength of her spiritual devotion. She was not portrayed as powerful because of conquest or violence, but because of unwavering focus and inner purity. Over time, Renuka and Jamadagni had several children. Their daughter Anjana was born first, followed later by 5 sons: Rumavan, Sohotra, Vasu, Visvavasu, and finally Rama Bhargava. This youngest son would become the legendary Parashurama, one of the most feared warrior sages in Hindu mythology. Parashurama performed severe penance and earned divine weapons from the gods, including the axe that gave him his famous name. Even as a young figure within the mythology, he represents obedience, martial power, and unwavering devotion to duty. Those qualities would soon place him at the center of one of the darkest moments in Renuka's story, because one morning, everything changed at the river. One day, while collecting water from the river as she always had, Renuka witnessed something unusual. A king was nearby, surrounded by his wives, laughing and enjoying himself in the water. For a brief moment, Renuka became captivated by the scene before her. Some versions of the story describe this as admiration. Others imply longing or emotional distraction. Whatever the interpretation, the important detail remains the same. Her concentration broke, and with it, her spiritual power vanished. The sand pot dissolved before she could carry the water home. Renuka, realizing what had happened, became frightened and anxious. She understood immediately that something sacred had been disrupted within her. In many versions of the myth, the issue is not physical infidelity, but the idea that her thoughts briefly wandered away from absolute devotion. When she returned home empty-handed, Jamadagni already knew what had happened. Through his yogic powers, he had witnessed the entire event from afar, and rather than responding with understanding or compassion, he reacted with fury. His anger became absolute and terrifying. This moment is deeply unsettling to modern audiences, and understandably so. Renuka's crime was fleeting thought and distraction, yet the punishment that followed would become catastrophic. The myth reflects ancient ideas surrounding purity, devotion, obedience, and spiritual expectation. It is not meant to feel fair. In fact, much of the emotional power of the story comes from how severe the consequences become. Jamadagni cursed Renuka, and heartbroken, ashamed, and devastated, she fled into the forest alone. Before we continue, Witches and Wanderers, let's pause for just a moment. Thank you for being here and spending your time with the Morbid Witch Podcast. Whether you're listening late at night, relaxing, or driving beneath the night sky, I truly appreciate every one of you. Your support, your curiosity, and your love for mythology and strange stories continue to keep this show alive. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to rate the show. You can listen to the Morbid Witch Podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Pandora. Now, let's return to the forest where Renuka began her penance. After leaving Jamadagni, Renuka traveled east into the wilderness to meditate and seek purification. Alone within the forest, she entered a period of deep penance and sorrow. This stage of the story reflects a recurring theme in Hindu mythology: transformation through suffering and discipline. Isolation becomes a place of spiritual confrontation. During her wandering, Renuka encountered two saints named Ignath and Jagannath. Rather than condemning her, they offered comfort and guidance. They instructed her to purify herself by bathing in a sacred lake and worshipping a Shiva linga they provided. Then they gave her a strange but humble task. She was to travel into a nearby town and beg for rice. Once she collected the rice, she was instructed to divide it equally. Half would be offered to the saints. The other half she would cook with jaggery and consume with complete devotion. This ritual would continue for 3 days, and only afterward could she return to Jamadagni. The instructions carry a symbolic meaning. Renuka's restoration comes not through punishment alone, but through humility, devotion, ritual, and self-discipline. The saints do not promise full forgiveness. In fact, they warn her that Jamadagni's anger may still remain. Yet they offer her a path toward spiritual restoration nonetheless. Renuka followed every instruction faithfully, and on the 4th day she returned home. But waiting for her there was something far worse than rejection. Even after Renuka completed her penance, Jamadagni's anger had not faded. Consumed by rage, he ordered his sons to kill their mother. One by one, the 4 eldest sons refused. They could not bring themselves to obey such a horrific command. In response, Jamadagni cursed them immediately, reducing them to ashes for disobedience. Then he turned to his youngest son, Parashurama. Unlike his brothers, Parashurama obeyed without hesitation. Taken up the divine axe gifted to him through penance, he beheaded his mother instantly. The scene is among the most shocking moments in Hindu mythology. It forces listeners to confront themes of obedience, authority, devotion, and violence all at once. Yet the story does not end there. Jamadagni, pleased by Parashurama's obedience, offered him a boon, and Parashurama immediately requested that his mother and brothers be restored to life. Jamadagni granted the wish, reviving them as though nothing had happened. The resurrection transforms the meaning of the myth. The story becomes not only one of violence, but also restoration and remorse. Jamadagni himself realizes the horror of what his rage created. Filled with regret, he vows never to surrender to anger again. In many ways, the story becomes a warning about uncontrolled fury and the devastation it causes. Renuka survives, but the emotional weight of the event lingers across every version of the legend. According to another tradition, tragedy eventually returned to Renuka's life. An emperor named Sahasrara desired her and sought to marry her. While Parashurama was away, Sahasrara attacked Jamadagni and murdered him along with Renuka's sons. Devastated beyond measure, Renuka threw herself into a pond known as Ram Sarovar. After her death, the lake became known as Renuka Lake, and in many traditions, her spirit and divinity became permanently connected to the water itself. Today, Renuka continues to be worshipped across many regions in India. Temples dedicated to her attract devotees who view her as a mother goddess, protector, and symbol of resilience. Her mythology contains pain and violence, but also devotion, spiritual endurance, and transformation. What makes her story so compelling is its complexity. Renuka is not simply passive within her mythology. She is powerful, spiritually gifted, and deeply revered. Yet she is also placed within impossible systems of expectation and obedience. Her story reflects both the sacredness and the dangers attached to the ideals of purity and devotion. And perhaps that complexity is why her legend endures, because Renuka is not easily simplified. She is miraculous, tragic, sacred, and unforgettable. Thank you for listening to the Morbid Witch Podcast, and thank you to all my witches and wanderers for continuing to support the show. Every listen, every rating, every comment, and every share helps keep these stories alive. I truly appreciate every one of you spending your time here with me. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, make sure you're following the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and Pandora. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and comment. And if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to rate the show. Until next time, stay strange, stay spooky, and remember, the shadows are always watching.